Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. I hope you had a wonderful weekend, a great Father's Day yesterday, and then a great Juneteenth. What is that? This was the CNN headline this weekend. Black Americans under assault. We talked about Juneteenth last week. We gave the whole story. It's a nice story, very nice story. And my conclusion was Juneteenth is a good thing. But it depends how it's taught and how it's framed. If Juneteenth, marking the end of slavery in America, if it is taught as the ultimate fulfillment of the promise of the Declaration of Independence, and if it's taught as this momentous, world-altering achievement of Western civilization, the first civilization to recognize and end the evils of slavery, and that was an evil part of the past of human existence, and we have a triumphant finale, then fantastic, right? If Juneteenth is framed that for thousands of years since the beginning of mankind, people of every race and color were enslaved and enslaved others, and that no one until the 18th century thought, you know what, maybe this isn't such a great thing that we're doing. And it was only in Western civilization, as Thomas Sowell said, you could research all of the 18th century, Africa or Asia or the Middle East, without finding any comparable rejection of slavery there as we had in the Western world. So if we're going to celebrate Juneteenth as the final fulfillment of American ideals, awesome. I am so all in on that. If it's taught as, you know, slavery still exists today, and black Americans are under assault, like CNN framed it, and you know, that assault looks a lot like capitalism, and we need a $15 an hour minimum wage and justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, then no. We don't need a federally certified grievance holiday in this country. If Juneteenth is, Black Lives Matter. If Juneteenth is black pride, black power, fist in the air, white people are racist, America's a racist country, here's all the reasons why, then no, that is a bad thing. And really would be the first holiday based on division. And it looks like that's how it's being framed by the left. It is not being framed as a day of unity, which it very well could and should be. As James Lindsay said, people are saying that Juneteenth is not a celebration of progress. It's a demand for progress to come, as if we haven't made any. This is an activist's holiday. It's not a good thing. Our local paper here in San Diego wrote all about Juneteenth, and this is the picture they chose. And I saw this picture, right on the front page and everything. I saw this picture, I was like, well, what? Why are we flying these colors, right? What's up with the Pan-African flag? It's not even a real flag of a real thing. It's like a made-up flag for a continent. Why are we flying green, black, and red flags and not red, white, and blue flags? That's your first clue that this is being used for division, not to mention the George Floyd signs in the background. If we can't unite around this moment in our history, the end of slavery, right, then clearly these activists don't want us to unite around anything. How can literally the end of slavery, the most important unifying moment in history, be framed as a point of division? All right, I'll give you another example of this division. There's a headline, for Juneteenth, America needs a new flag that all of us can honor. A new flag. Ooh. I didn't know we were accepting submissions for I didn't know we were looking for a new flag. I didn't know that was. So Macy Gray, the singer from the 90s, wrote this article. I don't know where she's been, or I don't know the background to this at all. But she says we need a new flag because of what happened on January 6th, the siege, the coup in America at the Capitol. And people were carrying American flags. So she says the American flag is the same thing as the Confederate flag. She has this quote, the American flag's been hijacked as code for a specific belief, right? If you want to replace something, first you got to tear it down. Right? God bless those believers, they can have it. Like the Confederate flag, it's tattered, dated, divisive, incorrect. It no longer represents America, no longer represents democracy and freedom. It no longer represents all of us. It's not fair to be forced to honor it. It's time for a new flag. And here she is. This is what Macy Gray came up with. The white stripes are not white. They're off-white. They're gray because America is not pure. And then the white stars there's 52 of them for Puerto Rico and something else, DC maybe. And they're not white, they're black and brown and pink. So there you go, that's the new flag. I'm not gonna do a whole thing on this, we've talked about this before, but just the very short of it. This is another example of flipping culture as opposed to flattening it, right? So Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., he wanted to flatten culture and the inequities, right? We want to judge each other, like no more discrimination. We want to judge each other by the content of our character. We want to flatten our culture, make everyone more equal. That's not what the left wants to do today. It's not what the woke left wants to do. Ibram X. Kendi says the solution to past discrimination is current discrimination. The solution to current discrimination is future discrimination. He doesn't want to get rid of discrimination. He just wants different discrimination. That's not flattening inequities. That's flipping them. Do you see the difference? And this is what Antonio Gramsci said we need to do. Not flatten, but flip. Use those words. We talked all about this last week. The Marxist left, the woke left, social justice, the whole thing, they're about tearing everything down and then flipping it. That's why Columbus Day, it's not let's just get rid of it. It's no. It's Indigenous Peoples Day. It's the opposite of Columbus Day. The left, when they tear down statues, don't be confused. They're not anti-statue, right? They're not like, oh, there's too much clutter around here. Let's tear down the statues and have some nice green space. They're not anti-statue. They're just anti the ones that currently exist, which is why the other day they unveiled a new statue in Newark to George Floyd. Why not? Right? Like, what a weird statue that is. Like, George Floyd was like some sort of like Will Rogers or some sort of like family man. Come join him and sit on the bench with him. Like, what are we? And then Brooklyn unveiled another statue of him, which is oddly white. On what planet should George Floyd be a role model or an icon to anyone? And he's not statue worthy. But there's plenty of room for statues. We've torn them all down. Let's tear down the statues of George Washington, replace it with George Floyd. Why not, right? Got to replace it with something. By the way, there's another statue that was unveiled in New York City recently. This is in Rockefeller Center. Brace yourselves for this statue here. Guys, let's play this grand unveiling from the other day. Oh, it's going to be beautiful. Look how big. What? What is that monstrosity? Could you, like, that statue is so racist. Could you imagine if I made that statue? Holy cow. That is horrific. In Rockefeller Center. Oh my goodness. Anyway. So that's what the left does, right? They tear things down, they replace it, they flip it. Be on the lookout for flipping culture. When they tear things down, they got to replace it with something. The American flag, right? They tear down the American flag. I thought they would replace it with the pride flag. But they're like, well, why not just this new version of an American flag? That's what they do. Now, I want to end here with a couple examples of truth, the true story. It's the name of the show. Our local paper, San Diego, Southern California, did a nice little story the other day of a young woman who graduated from University of San Diego State, I think, San Diego State University, and she took her graduation photos in some pepper fields with her parents. Right? So this is a published. There you go. Nice. Very nice story of America. Someone could go from farm worker to college graduate in one generation. And it's nice. But doesn't that debunk the claim that America is an evil and oppressive country to minorities? This family could only succeed by working hard, earning money, and these parents teaching her daughter the values that lead to graduating college and living a successful life in the United States of America. Like, I don't get it. Like, we're not a country stuck in classism. Here's proof. There she is. yet we're all still supposed to pretend like everyone's a victim and no one can achieve. I don't get it. Right? So we can continue to talk about how evil and evil and evil we are nonstop, or we can just realize what the truth is that, oh no, you can succeed. It's mostly up to you. Have you seen this video yet? It's fantastic. This is Indiana or Illinois. I forget what state. Illinois. A guy spoke up at a school board meeting. Here's a little bit of it.
When you talk about critical race theory, which is pretty much going to be teaching kids how to hate each other, how to dislike each other, that's pretty much what it's going to, that's pretty much, I don't care what you say, it's pretty much what it's going to all come down to. You're going to deliberately teach kids, this white kid right here got it better than you because he white? You're going to purposely tell a white kid, oh, the black people are all down and suppressed. How do I have 2 medical degrees if I'm sitting here oppressed? 2 medical degrees. No mom, no dad in the house. Worked my way through college. Sat there and hustled my butt off to get through college. You gonna tell me somebody that looked like all y'all white folks kept me from doing that? Are you serious? Nobody want to get to the heart of the matter, get to the meat of the matter, get to the moral of the story. It all comes down to it. The person that's going to be suffering from this, the ones going to be hurt from this, is the kids. 10 years from now, if this stuff goes on, whose fault is it going to be? Whose fault is it going to be? Who we going to look back on and blame for this? Because this is stuff we talking about right now. This stuff is going on right now. I do this stuff on a daily basis. I'm in the hood. I'm in the communities. I'm out there with folks in their face. I've been doing this stuff since I was 18 years old, talking to black folks. And you know what? None of them are buying this nonsense. None of them are. But if you want to implement this into the school system, I guarantee you to the day that I die, I'm going to be the very person right there debunking stuff, tearing stuff down, letting them know they can do exactly what I did and get exactly where I am by putting themselves to work and getting there. And ain't not one white person ever going to keep any of them from getting there. So the CRT stuff, BS.
So that's the truth. And I don't ever want to, I'm not going to criticize critical race theory on the show or social justice anymore without articulating what is true as well. And here's the great Glenn Lowry talking about the things that really factor into a successful life.
Here, the challenge here, everybody's got to figure out how to make a life out of the raw material that they're given, which is their sexual orientation, and it is their ethnic and racial and national heritage. It is the culture. Everybody comes with a mother tongue and so forth. We are given these things. Those are the initial facts about ourselves. They are not a life. They're just the raw material. We still have to make a script for our lives. We still have to fashion a vision for ourselves. We still have to be in the world. That's a challenge that everybody faces. And the reason that I can read, the great Russian novelists of the 19th century, the Dostoevskys and the Tolstoys, the reason I can read them and be enriched by them is not because I see my life in their narrative, but it's because their narrative is in the service of this existential challenge that all of us face, which is how to grow out of where we start into the fullness of our humanity.
Exactly. Well, that's perfect. So it's about personal responsibility. And from that, there's a unity because we're all in this same mission to make a life. And when we're all in that same mission to make a life, then we can also make a country. So I love the idea of Juneteenth. I think it's great. And conservatives shouldn't be against it. We need to embrace Juneteenth, but we need to make sure that it's not a black holiday, but truly an American holiday. Coming up next, I want to talk about a vaccine passport. I know there was rumors of it, and then it kind of went away because I don't know where you live, maybe in a red state, hopefully. And this whole COVID thing seems way long gone. I'd like to report from the People's Republic of California that a vaccine passport is very much alive. And if we don't stop it here in California, it could still be coming to a state near you. We'll talk about the vaccine passport next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So it is extremely likely that we will have full-on vaccine passports in California. And I say in California, I really mean in California first. When something happens in California, unfortunately, and I apologize, it tends to sweep from the West Coast across the country. If you are in a blue state, watch out. This is probably coming your way. If you're in a red state, be very grateful that you're not in a blue state. So here's the background, what's going on in California. Our governor, first of all, he insists that this is not a vaccine passport, okay? Stop even asking him. It's definitely not a vaccine passport. It's merely a uniform, digitized version of your vaccine card that proves whether or not you've been vaccinated, that's offered for every business to use if they want to require you to have a vaccine for entrance or service. But it's totally not a vaccine passport. You got it? It's totally different. So you go to the website and you type in your information, and then you get a QR code on your phone, and then you take that you like save it in your phone, and then you take it wherever you go, and the business can scan it, and then it pops up right away whether or not you're vaccinated. That's how that works, technically. Now, the reason why I say this is extremely likely and not guaranteed is because it's a government-run website and program, so it's run by people that are completely inept and operating in a system that incentivizes incompetence. So that's like the only thing we have going. That's the only thing people who love freedom have going for us right now. That's the barrier between freedom and tyranny is, gosh, these people are such morons. And they've already had technical problems. That's made it unworkable since it was released a couple days ago. So it may never really get off the ground just because they're so inept, but if they could pull it together, they are certainly trying. The other, it may not happen is our Governor Newsom is being recalled. So if there's enough outrage from the people of California over it, then he may back down, just like he did with allowing schools to open, even though his kids went to private school all during vaccine. But he finally allowed schools to open in California just as our recall effort got enough signatures to put it on a ballot. So this could be stopped, but they sure want it. There's no doubt about that. So you may have heard that in California, ever since June 15th, last Tuesday, that we're mask-free in California. No more masks. It's not true. OSHA, the Occupational Safety Health Administration, I don't know what the A is, they just on Friday finally announced that employees can take their masks off. So the original mask, you can take your mask off, that's for customers. But employees still had to wear one. And then OSHA went back and forth like 100 different times. They could not make up their mind about what they wanted to do. And they finally on Friday landed on you don't have to wear a mask if you're an employee if you're vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, you still have to wear a mask. But even this makes no sense because, first of all, if you don't have COVID, you're not spreading it. Second of all, if other people are vaccinated, they're not getting it. And thirdly, anyone who hasn't gotten the vaccine yet and has never had COVID, myself included, I'm fully aware of the risks. And I assume all liability. I don't need your protection, OSHA. And neither does anyone else who is vaccinated because they're not at risk. They have the protection. No one needs any more protection. So OSHA did not go nearly far enough in giving the people of California the freedom back. And they still, and this is why I bring this up more than anything, because this is certainly going to go federal, and this needs to be part of the conversation. It's so frustrating that it's not. No one is talking about those who have natural immunity, meaning those who have already had COVID and have recovered and therefore have immunity themselves, and whether or not they really, I would argue, don't need the vaccine. No one's talking about that. Let me just say this up front before we play this clip. If a government said, hey, you need to, in order to go to this concert or in order to go to work, you need to either be vaccinated or prove that you have natural immunity because you've recovered, then you can, right? It needs to be both. Why are they so obsessed with just the vaccine? Why are they not including natural immunity as well? This is Congressman Tom Massey from Kentucky, Tea Party guy, super smart engineering guy. Here he is.
So you're saying, I just want, number one, you didn't answer whether or not you've been vaccinated.
Well, first of all, it's none of your business, but I'm going to tell you. I'm not vaccinated, and until there's some science, by the way, I have a master's of science degree from MIT. I'm not a virologist, but I can read data. Everybody just needs to read, and don't put your head in the sand. Look at the data. I'm not going to get the vaccine until there's data that shows that it will improve upon the immunity that's been conferred to me as a result of a natural infection that I had.
So good. All right, let me give you the data we do have. There was a Cleveland Clinic study, 52,000 employees. All right, there were infections among these 52,000 employees. 99.3. Right? 99.3 of the infections. Now keep in mind, infection is different than getting sick. You can get infected and not even know it, right? But these are just infections. 99.3% of infections over the period of the study were unvaccinated people who have never had it before. Okay? The remaining 0.7% of infections were people who did not have a previous infection, but were vaccinated. So they were vaccinated, but still got infected. Again, not sick, but infected. Of the 52,000 people in this study, not a single infection of COVID, not a single one, not one case from someone who has previously had COVID and recovered, regardless of whether or not they got the vaccine. The suggestion here is from this study is that natural immunity is stronger than even the vaccine when it comes to protecting you. So why is the left so obsessed with everyone getting the vaccine, when the science suggests that natural immunity is as effective, if not even more effective, but it's given zero consideration by OSHA, the Democrats, or anyone else on the left? And they're supposed to be the party of science. So again, if you're going to require vaccine passports, then you must also allow people to prove that they have antibodies from natural immunity. You just go give blood and they do an antibody test and that's it. But they're not interested in that. They're not talking about that. They're not allowing that. They're not, why not? Why are they so obsessed with you getting the vaccine? Must be some microchip. No, come on. See why? See, you were fine, and then it just went over the line. There's no microchip. Also, if you're going to force employees who have not had the vaccine yet to wear masks at work, that's a scarlet letter. You're now segregating employees who don't want the vaccine. So there's like social, like weird discrimination implications of that. But that person who we're segregating from the rest of your work, that person, if they've had COVID before, they may be safer than anyone. They may have more immunity, more protection, to be safer and healthier than anyone else in your work who may be vaccinated but have never had COVID. Make sense? And also here in California, you still have to wear masks if you go to a school. Kids, even if you're an adult who's vaccinated, you still have to wear a mask, even just stepping foot in a K through 12 school. And that's a building full of people, kids who are the safest of everyone when it comes to getting COVID. And I'll end here. We've had 20 deaths last week in California, 20 deaths from COVID. Now there's a question, from COVID or with COVID, right? We're still not making that distinction properly. But there were 20 deaths marked as deaths from COVID. It could have been just with COVID, right? 20. Out of 40 million people, there's 40 million people in the state. We had 20 people die from COVID. Every week, there's 70 people who die in car accidents. Every week in California, 70 from car accidents. Every week in a normal flu year, there's 120 people who die from the flu. And we've had 20 from COVID. It's over. But in California, we still are in a state of emergency. Why? Why are we still in a state of emergency? I bet it goes back to the vaccine passport. Just wait. Talking about moving the goalposts, this is the ultimate example. Newsom said this disease has not been extinguished. It's not vanished. That's the ultimate moving of the goalpost. Now we have to wait until the disease has vanished. That's impossible, which means the state of emergency will remain forever. And that's what F.A. Hayek said. He said, emergencies have always been the pretext on which the safeguards of individual liberty have been eroded. And once they're suspended, it's not difficult for anyone who's assumed emergency powers, like Newsom, to see to it that the emergency will persist. And that's a problem with narcissists like Newsom. Same thing with these critical race theory activists as well. They're not interested in seeing the problem resolved. In fact, they have such perverse incentives that they get more power, more prestige, more fame, the worse the problem gets. It's the opposite of skin in the game. Be very careful of people like that. Coming up next, we'll put a bow, at least on this first chapter of Biden and his foreign policy trip. Give it a couple days for the fallout now. Now what? What do we do next? And how bad has our position, our posture around the world been eroded? Not from Trump, by no stretch, but from our current president. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, we have a ton to talk about with Russia still, and some fallout still from the president's trip the other day, and then what do we do next, obviously? This is a clip, though, that did not get enough attention about Russia hacking everything that we have in America here.
Cybersecurity. I talked about the proposition that certain critical infrastructure should be off limits to attack, period, by cyber or any other means. I gave them a list. If I'm not mistaken, I don't have it in front of me, 16 specific entities, 16 defined as critical infrastructure.
Please stop hacking us. Peter Ruff, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Mr. Ruff, how are you, sir?
Great, how are you?
Good to talk to you. We have a ton to do here. Let's go big picture first. I want to get back to the hacking. What is Russia's motivation? What's their goal? I heard this idea the other day, and I'm sympathetic to it. I want to know what you think. That they used to be a major player, obviously, but now they're not anymore. So they're just kicking up dirt to try to pretend to be relevant or seem relevant, and they're waging like a guerrilla warfare to punch above their weight. What do you think of that?
Well, there's a famous quote, it's almost a bit of a cliche now to cite it, but I'll cite it nonetheless, that Vladimir Putin offered years ago, saying the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. We won the Cold War. We were very happy with that victory. Western audiences rejoiced around the world. Americans were very pleased. But oftentimes when there's a winner, there's also a loser. And that was the Soviet apparatchiks, the Soviet leadership. So for Vladimir Putin, who of course was a KGB officer in the former Soviet Union, his goal, I think, is as a revanchist to restore Russia to its Soviet glory days. And that means extending its sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. That means puffing itself up to be a major geopolitical actor on the global stage, even though Russia, in many different indicators, is declining demographically, economically, and so forth. And that means, of course, also taking on the U.S. And to the extent that he can be on the same stage as the American president, who is truly the leader of the free world and the leader of the world superpower, I think it helps him with political prestige. So for Putin, it's about extending Russia's power abroad. It's about shoring up his support at home. Remember, he is an autocrat for all intents and purposes who has his own domestic problems. And all of that, I think, aligns and combines in what we've seen over the last several weeks.
What's the right posture Americans and our government should have? Like, should we be treating them like a world player, or does that give them too much credo? / should we be maybe, I don't want to say ignoring them, but keeping what we do with them behind the scenes? What do you think?
I think we should be realistic. Russia has established itself in certain arenas. During the Obama years, it annexed Crimea. It also moved into the Middle East and established a military footprint in Syria. And so on the ground in Syria, for example, clearly American and Russian military operatives and leaders have to have conversations to deconflict their military so we don't end up in some sort of conflict and war accidentally. Beyond that, though, at the grand sort of strategic level where two leaders meet like they did in Geneva, there really isn't all that much to talk about because there really aren't any opportunities for breakthrough. There was nothing on the agenda in Geneva where you could say Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden needed to get this across the finish line or seal the deal. So from my point of view, it's really rather simple. We should treat our friends and allies as such, and we should treat our opponents and enemies the way that they deserve to be treated. Clearly, Russia is against the American order. It wants to destroy our alliance system, and we should meet that with strength and have a credible deterrent.
So let's talk about these hacks. They've done or are suspected of doing way more hacks than I'm even aware of occurred. You mentioned in your article you wrote in the National Review about this, like solar winds, and so run through some of these hacks. And then my other question is, are they way ahead of us when it comes to our hackability, or are we, like, where are we? Like, are they behind us? Are we the best in the world when it comes to hacking, or are we woefully behind? Where do we rank?
Well, I think our technical abilities are top notch. I don't think there's anybody who can surpass American technical capabilities in this sort of cyber warfare domain. The real question is, what political constraints do we put on our hacking, or what political guidance do we give our cyber operations? In the case of SolarWinds, which you just referenced, which was a huge Russian information cyber operation in 2020, President Biden responded with countermeasures, and he said publicly, and I think this connects to your previous question, that he wanted to be proportional so as not to risk escalation. Well, it turns out the Russians subsequently followed up with attacks on USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. That's at least the one public hacking post-SolarWinds and post-American response that we know about. So I think sometimes the Russians clearly have capabilities in this arena. The U.S. has, I would say, even more capabilities. But I think the question is, what political guidance do we give? And if our posture is to be that we will restrain ourselves to the level of our Russian adversaries, then Vladimir Putin thinks he can control what is called the escalation ladder. He knows that Joe Biden won't do more than be proportionate, if at all, and that then means that that he's prepared to undertake more of these activities. So we have to deter them. I think that sometimes means going on offense, because the Chinese, also to name another opponent of the U.S. over the last years, have been really aggressive in this domain. I mean, they've the equivalent of backed up a Brinks truck to the Pentagon and stolen our personnel files. If you did that physically, it would be considered an act of war. But because it's in the cyber domain, which is relatively new, and we don't quite know how to think about it, the response isn't quite as robust as it perhaps needs to be.
What could a robust attack look like in that world? Like, would we shut down their oil pipelines? Or like, what could one be capable of doing?
Yeah, I think we've seen, this is a little bit of a different example, but the Israelis have obviously been pretty active on the Iranian nuclear program, which is an existential issue for them. So you would expect sabotage and other operations of a whole different dimension than between the U.S. and Russia. But clearly we should, if not signal, undertake some operations that make clear to them that we cannot allow them to shut down parts of our critical infrastructure. If I could just expand on that, I mean, one thing that bothered me about Joe Biden's, the clip you just played, giving of 16 areas to the Russians that are off limits, is anytime you tell an autocrat like Vladimir Putin that something's off limits, then everything else becomes fair game. And this can have disastrous consequences. In American history, we have great examples of this. In the 1950s, the Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, gave a speech about the American defense perimeter, and he did not include Korea. So lo and behold, the Soviets, together with what is now the North Koreans, invaded South Korea. More recently, in the Obama years in Syria, we developed these so-called de-escalation zones with Bashar al-Assad. And that basically meant that they could freeze their operations in that part of Syria and concentrate their offensives elsewhere before returning back to that original zone. So you have to be very careful about establishing and identifying areas if you're not prepared to allow them to just attack other parts.
Yeah, those historical examples are really important, because I was willing to give a benefit of the doubt where maybe one is not deserved. That, like, he didn't mean you can attack these other things. He just meant if you do, then we're really going to strike back with a missile and we're not kidding around. But if I'm hearing you right, like, well, we also have to analyze that through the prism and through the lens of a dictator who may interpret that differently than the grace I'm giving him.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to always remember is that we can be sort of solipsistic and read these things through our own lens, as you put it. I mean, what we might consider prudential diplomacy, an autocrat might consider feckless or weakness, and he might pounce on that. I think there are examples of that in the Iran nuclear deal, for example, but in other domains of American foreign policy. One thing, though, that I would say, just in defense of our president and of Joe Biden, is what we saw was the press conference after some of the briefings that his aides gave on Air Force One and subsequently in Washington to reporters. But we weren't there for the main event, right, which is the actual negotiation, the actual meeting. And we can at least hope that in that meeting, what you basically said is what message Joe Biden gave Vladimir Putin, which is to say, these are critical infrastructure areas. They're absolutely off limits. But if you also respond in others, you can expect a response of some sort. Who knows? We weren't there.
Yeah. Peter Ruff from Hudson Institute. Peter, we have tons more Russia stuff to talk about. Can we do it again another day?
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. Yeah, again, Hudson Institute. And he wrote an article in the National Review. It's time for Biden to get tough on Russia, and there's a bunch of other topics to touch on there. Coming up next, Professor Vincent Rackaniello. I think this is our grand finale for the professor. He's got to profess starting next week. He's got some summer classes he's got to teach. So our grand finale with the professor coming up next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.
Yeah, look, I think we should think of this as COVID on steroids. You know, if before you walked into a room and it took you 10 minutes to get exposed to COVID, now you could get exposed in something like 5 minutes. So if you haven't been vaccinated, you should be worried. And it's another reason for you to talk to your doctor and ask them about getting vaccinated and ultimately to get vaccinated. If you
COVID on steroids. Professor Vincent Racaniello is here, virologist, Columbia University, host of This Week in Virology, microbe.tv. Professor, hello, sir.
Good
We've
evening.
been hearing
Good
every
afternoon.
once in a while. Every once in a while, I hear about COVID on steroids. Tell us about the Delta variant.
This is just baloney. There's no COVID on steroids. There's just COVID, and you need to get vaccinated. The variants have been arising ever since the end of last year. They are slightly more fit than whatever is before, so they tend to displace previous variants. There's no evidence that any of them are more virulent than before. There's no evidence that any of them are more transmissible. And yet, certain people and the press is constructing a narrative that is meant to scare people. What you need to know is that if you get vaccinated, you will be protected against disease and death from COVID. There's no question. No variant will kill you if you're vaccinated. And that's the bottom line. If you're not vaccinated, yeah, it's a big problem. But this gentleman that you played the clip where he said it takes less time for you to get infected now with a variant, that's just not true. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. And I would like people just to remember that if you get vaccinated, you'll be protected.
Yep. I got a question. Let's do a question about our vaccine, and then I got a China vaccine question. So there's talk, I've heard talk about kids with this enlarged heart issue. And they seem to be a correlation. It looks like a correlation. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so some kids seem to be getting myocarditis, right? An inflammation of the heart after vaccination. It looks like it might be associated with the vaccine. It's a very, very rare side effect. And, you know, there is a low level of myocarditis anyway. But it's treatable. And as long as your physicians are looking out for it, it's not going to lead to serious consequences. That's what my infectious disease physician, Daniel Griffin, has been telling me, that it's a treatable condition and it's not something to be concerned about. And the COVID that you would get, the myocarditis that you would get from COVID is much worse. And so therefore, the benefit of the vaccine outweighs the risk.
I've heard talk of maybe kids, we should think about having kids only have maybe one dose as opposed to two that adults get. Something there maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's been some suggestion that the myocarditis, is mainly seen after the second dose. The problem with that is that the protection is better after 2 doses, right? So especially against variants, it seems that 2 doses is really need to give you good, strong protection. So again, Dr. Griffin has said you should get 2 doses, and just be aware that if you have the symptoms of myocarditis, you can get treated for it, and it's not going to be a serious condition.
Read here that Chile has the 5th highest vaccination rate in the world, but this was last week. Their capital just went back down on lockdown due to surging cases, and the suggestion is because they've been given the China vaccine in Chile. What do we know now about the vaccine they have in China, and why don't they just use ours or the one we've been using?
Well, of course, the problem is that there's not enough vaccine. So the mRNA vaccines that are mainly used in the U.S. are fantastic. They give you very high efficacy, and they work really well. And not everyone can get them. So other countries make vaccines. China has made a few different vaccines, and one of them is an inactivated vaccine. And what that is you take the virus, you grow it up in the lab, and then you inactivate it so it's not infectious, but it's injected and it makes antibodies, kind of like the Salk polio vaccine that we used to use in the U.S. And in fact, we still use to this day. So the efficacy of that vaccine, it has been low in certain areas, 50-ish, 60-ish %. They did a trial in Chile, and it was, not really over 70% efficacy. And we're not sure why, right? There are a lot of reasons why. But, if it's 70% efficacy, then that leaves a lot of people still vulnerable to disease. And that may be what's going on in Chile. But again, we need to know who's getting infected. Is it the vaccinated people or is it non-vaccinated people? And what's happening? Are they getting mild disease, moderate, severe disease? We need to know those details.
I know you're a big lab leak guy. That this leak from. That was sarcasm. I don't know if everyone could say. Sorry, maybe the sarcasm may not come. But I did read this from Ryan McNamara. Research associate scientist at UNC studying HIV. I don't want to read the whole thing, but his point is that just because the initial cluster of COVID was identified at Wuhan doesn't mean that that's where the first human infection occurred. He said it could have occurred in other places, but this is the first one that continued to spread from human to human.
Sure.
And he went on and talked about how HIV was an example of that, and how there's been many examples of spillover from monkeys into humans, but that there was this one strain that happened to continue on. What do you think of that?
Oh, so the HIV is a great example. We first picked up HIV in Los Angeles in 1981, right? First time we saw it. But the virus actually went from a chimp to a hunter in the 1920s in Africa. And it took that long to spread through the human population. So where you first detect an infection does not mean that is where it began. And I agree with his assessment. And we are now learning that SARS-CoV-2-like viruses, the virus that causes COVID, are in bats from Japan all the way down to Thailand and even further south, many, many thousands of square miles. So those are all candidates for a spillover into people. So we need to do more sampling and look for a virus that's closer to SARS-CoV-2 in nature. And we'll eventually find it. Yeah, so he's right. And just because we saw the first 40 cases in Wuhan doesn't mean that that's where it began.
Interesting. Professor, we got 2 minutes. First, I just want to say thank you for the year that we spent together. When COVID first started, I came across your course of virology, Intro to Virology, and I sat on my couch every night and just plowed through your course. And I was like, pretty early on, I was like, oh, I wonder if the professor will be willing to join us on the show. Like, that'd be amazing. And you've taken time out of your day to be with us every single Monday, and I'm super grateful. Do you have any grand conclusion? And I hope we can definitely talk again, sir. I hope this isn't our last goodbye, but you do have to go on and profess and actually teach paying customers of yours, paying students. So I hope we can talk again. But do you have any grand conclusion about it all so far?
Sure.
Where's your head and your heart at with just everything?
So first of all, let me thank you. You've been a really highly respectful radio host. You ask great questions. I think you've been perfect, and I've loved talking with you. And I'll come on anytime you want. I'm here. I just so happens that I have to teach a summer virology course at the same time, and that's for 6 weeks. But it's important to teach the students about viruses. My overall view here is that people should really be amazed that we were able to get vaccines developed in less than a year, because that just shows you the technology, the science and technology that we've developed. We tested them. We made sure they were safe. And anyone who's suspicious shouldn't worry about it, because they are safe. The only question is how long they're going to last. And that's the only data we would get by testing them longer. So it's quite remarkable. The only problem, of course, is that not everyone has these vaccines. Only certain countries have vaccinated a good fraction of the population. And we need to get most of the world vaccinated in order to stop this pandemic, right? It may be stopping soon in the US, but in many other countries, it's not. And so my kind of grand overview is our science is amazing. We could do incredible things, and that's good for the next pandemic because there's going to be one. But until we can vaccinate all of humanity, we're still falling short, and I'm hoping that we can fix that. But this just shows what a virus can do in a pandemic, and it's the first time for many people to experience a pandemic of this magnitude. It really screws up your life, right? Everyone's life has been screwed up. So
you got that right.
Let's try and prevent the next one, and if there is another one that we can't prevent, just respond a lot quicker.
And grateful you've been here to walk us through it. Microbe.tv. You can stay in touch with the professor there. Professor, we'll talk again, sir. Not a goodbye. We'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a wonderful day. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word.